Welcome back to Ring of Fire. I'm Farron Cousins in for Mike Papantonio this week. Some of the biggest moneymakers for corporations also turn out to be some of the most deadly products for American consumers. And in spite of the risks associated with their products, corporations seem eager to sell us products that'll put us in the grave and put billions of dollars in a CEO's pocket. Joining me now to talk about the ways in which corporate America profits off consumer deaths are attorneys Howard Nations and Peter Berg. Howard, let's start with you. I mean, I know if you go back through history, corporations have had this long, sordid history of selling us products that are going to kill us. And I think one of the oldest ones out there is asbestos. Tell us a little about that.
The asbestos story is pretty amazing, Farron. As early as 1898, it was recognized in England that asbestos dust was extremely dangerous. And we kept mining it here, and in the 1920s, when the lawsuits began against Johns Manville, they lobbied Congress and they got a national legislation passed that said that these should be treated as workers' compensation cases. The effect of that is denial of trial by jury. They were handled administratively as comp claims, because if there's anything that these corporate terrorists really fear, it's a trial lawyer with the right to discover, get into their books, get into their documents and discover them, and then present that to a jury. So the first thing Johns Manville did was set aside the right to trial by jury. Then they funded phony medical studies. Eventually, independent medical exams linked the disease, several diseases, including, of course, mesothelioma, to the asbestos. In an internal memo, it's pretty indicative of their attitude. This was actually from a corporate discovery. The internal memo actually says, quote, "If you have enjoyed a good life from working with asbestos products, why not die from it?" Can you believe that?
That is completely indicative of the corporate mentality of the time. And asbestos, you know, as you said, the industry worked very hard to prevent any of these cases from going in front of a jury. And a large reason for that is because in public, the companies were telling us that there is no possible way a human being would get sick from asbestos. While on the other side, in private, their internal memos showed that they knew this was happening. I believe, you know, by the 1930s, a lot of these memos came to light, but they had known for 40 years prior to that. And even today, we still have over 100,000 deaths every year from asbestos. I know there's a lot of companies in Canada that are still mining asbestos. They're sending it all over the world. So this is not a case or a product that is, you know, outdated or irrelevant today. It's still being used. It's still out there on the market. And speaking of products still on the market that are killing people, Peter, let me go to you. I think tobacco is one of the biggest ones we have out there today and has been for the last 50 years. You tell us the tobacco story on how they're making billions off killing their customers.
Farron, it's amazing how soon we all forget with tobacco. You go back to the 1940s, and the tobacco industry, the information was readily available to them, that internally they understood the risk and perils, including death, and a horrible death from tobacco. And yet they went out and they lobbied and they promoted and said over and over the years, and did so very successfully with their lobbyists among Congress and so forth, to not have it be regulated. And for years and years, I'm old enough that I remember all those TV commercials promoting tobacco, and some of them to children. That was part of their actual strategy, Joe Camel being one of the most infamous that we all heard about.
Right. Well, you can also, I mean, you can go on YouTube, you can find clips where they have, you know, Fred Flintstone selling Winstons.
Absolutely, because it's all about profits over people. And they were willing to do whatever they had to do throughout that time period. I mean, those of us who remember, you can't forget in the 90s, 1994, the 7 CEOs of the 7 largest tobacco companies testifying before Congress and telling us nicotine is not addictive. Outrageous, when in fact their own internal information and information in the science community told us just the opposite. And I think the other thing when we look at the tobacco story, that is really important today is not only what the tobacco companies knew but were not disclosing to the public, but the fact that they were actually doing things to make it look less harmful, while in fact they were adding things to the particular product that was making it more addictive and more harmful. It's just outrageous.
Right, and they still today try to dupe consumers by selling light cigarettes or what they call low tar cigarettes, and such a thing does not exist. In fact, studies have shown that if somebody is actually smoking what they call a light cigarette, which may have less tar, may have less nicotine, but they hit it harder and they smoke more often, so they're actually doing more damage to their bodies by purchasing these light cigarettes. And you know, I want to switch gears a little bit here too, because Howard, you know very well about another product out there, which is lead. You know, there was a time when we had lead in our gasoline, we had lead in our paint. It was all over society. And this, you know, lead, for lack of a better term, is toxic to human beings, correct?
Very, very much so. In fact, this is one of the most shocking stories that you'll find, that in the 1980s they discovered that lead paint and lead in gasoline, the average American lost 6 IQ points from exposure. But listen to this statistic. In the percentage of our population that were determined to be intellectually gifted decreased by 40%. The percentage of the U.S. population that were determined to be mentally challenged increased by 40%. And the studies relate lead poisoning to antisocial behavior and criminal behavior. And for a 50-year period, GM, DuPont, Standard Oil, and American Petroleum Institute lied about the lead hazards and lobbied to keep it on the market. A typical example, and this is a standard pattern. The Ethel Corporation from 1964 to 1981, when they were being heavily attacked in the United States, increased their production overseas of lead products. And that's what they do. When you take a product off the market in the United States, they move it to countries where they do not have product liability laws. But the biggest single issue on this, the World Health Organization said that lead gasoline was, quote, the mistake of the 20th century. But the thing that blows your mind, listen to these statistics. The United Nations Commission report the annual cost of lead in gasoline, the annual cost, at 1.1 million deaths, 322 million lost IQ points, 60 million crimes, and then a total of $2.4 trillion in losses from the decrease in the global domestic product. And the major problem we're facing today is that lead doesn't degrade, it's not combustible, it's never destroyed. We have a globe that is covered by it right now. And the ultimate irony is that lead did not benefit engine performance.
You know, I think what's very interesting about this story is that the ancient Romans actually understood how dangerous and how deadly lead could be. You know, they associated madness with it. They understood it, and yet corporations today in the last 100, 200 years said, okay, well, maybe we've known about these risks for several thousand years, but it can make us money, and money is more important than the safety of the public. And that actually brings us to the next industry, Peter, which is Big Pharma. I don't think anybody has done a better job of selling deadly products, except maybe tobacco, than Big Pharma. Tell us what's happening with them.
Yeah, you know, there is a war on drugs out there, and it's a war on drugs on us as consumers by Big Pharma. I think one of the more interesting statistics on that has come to light recently is the alarming rate of death that women are experiencing with painkillers and prescription drugs. We've seen a 5-fold increase in these type of deaths in women from 1999 to 2010, according to studies done by the CDC. And it's alarming. Now, women are still behind men in total number of deaths, but the increase is the result of just a massive supply, flooding the market with these painkillers. And women are particularly vulnerable because they suffer more than men from things like chronic pain. It's horrifying. I was looking at 48,000 women killed between 1999 and 2010. Over 6,000 died in 2010 alone from Vicodin and OxyContin. What are we doing to our public? And the answer is that if Big Pharma can make money, they're going to promote these drugs. And there isn't a lot of consumer protection these days. One of the big issues recently we know, and I'm sure it's a topic we'll discuss, is Bartlett. What's recently happened with the Supreme Court in terms of a 5-4, the Roberts Court really embracing the needs and wants of Big Pharma, adverse to consumers. Particularly, we've got a dynamic where consumers are taking more and more generic drugs and are being left without much of a remedy, if any.
Right. And Howard, we've only got about a minute left, so in that last minute, can you give us your thoughts on the Bartlett decision and what that's going to do for American consumers?
Well, 80% of drug users use generic drugs. The effect of the Bartlett decision in conjunction with the Mensing decision from 2 years ago by the U.S. Supreme Court is that those drug users, generic drug users, no longer have the protection of state laws. They have lost their right to prosecute a drug company if they have a defectively designed product or if they fail to adequately warn. It's all because of a simple rule of the FDA. And the Supreme Court said in Mensing 2 years ago, they said, this is not for us to fix. This is for either the Congress or the FDA. The FDA has been, they've been approached about this. They've had petitions filed. They've been contacted by Senator Leahy and others. They chose to do absolutely nothing. All it would take to solve this whole thing is a simple rule change by the FDA, a simple rule change. They have failed and refused to do it. And
well,
yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, the main reason that's not going to happen is because the FDA is completely captured by the pharmaceutical industry with the revolving door of people coming from the FDA to Big Pharma, from Big Pharma to the FDA. But unfortunately, we're out of time. So Howard Nations, Peter Berg, two of the best attorneys out there, thank you very much for joining me today.